Hello and welcome to the Christopher Moonlight Productions live stream. I am Christopher Moonlight and I am doing this live stream because I have ADHD and I am having trouble focusing on my work. So I thought I would just get this going, and then who should show up but Scribe Light. Welcome, Scribe. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, just kind of happening. So we're just going to do this. I wrote this a while ago, as it says in the article. So I want to go over the article, maybe add some stuff, and maybe Scribe has some comments or questions or criticisms. He is
Or recipes, maybe.
recipes because he is
Sure, why
my
not?
foil. And what do we do with leftover recipes? We wrap them in foil.
Good comeback. Light on your feet today. Good job.
I am on fire. Anyway, so screenwriting for beginners as told through the movie Aliens. Aliens is one of my favorite all-time movies. It's, in my mind, there's really like Alien and Aliens could be one movie together. And I'm sure you've seen it. You like it?
Yes, I've seen it many times, and I do like it. I've got some. I might have some thoughts to add as we go, but it depends on. I haven't read this article, so this will be new to me too.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to read it out loud.
Mhm.
And Winston might bark. I heard him growl at something. Someone's moving in across the street, and they've got workers doing stuff to the house. So, of course, he's got to bark at him. So anyway, screenwriting for beginners. So here's the explanation of this article. The following is a kind of overly simplified explanation as to how your basic movie script story is broken down. That I originally wrote to someone who asked my advice on the subject. There is, of course, a lot to add to this conversation. I'm going to be very brief, but if you've never written a script before and want to try, this may be a good jumping off point. I hope it helps. I found this cool picture of the original poster folded up online. So I originally wrote this as an email to someone that was asking me about screenwriting. I thought, that's pretty good. So I put it on my blog spot. Then I got locked out of my Google account. And so now it's on Substack. I'll put the link in the description another time or after I'm done with this. So telling a good story is a many-layered thing. And like learning to draw or play an instrument, you have to suck at it before you can get good. I don't even know if I'm good, but I think I know enough to keep things entertaining. I always say I'm not a great writer. I'm serviceable, and serviceable will lead you to good. Don't worry about great. I think I'm probably sound like a broken record on that by now. The first thing to understand about most stories is that they're broken down into 3 acts. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but 3 is the standard, and you should stick with that number until you understand why. And just to add to that, I think understanding why people kind of, there's that the saying, you need to know the rules before you can break them. I think if you exercise, if you lift weights or swim or anything like that, it's a better analogy because it's like learning to know your body. Like your body knows what it can do, and your body knows what to push. And, also when you see, there goes Winston. When you've been doing a bunch of exercise and then something demands that you use your physical attributes, then suddenly it's revealed to you what your exercise hasn't built up and what you need to go back and work on. So that's a little analogy there. Anyway, my upcoming film, it's not upcoming anymore. It happens to be on Amazon, Tubi, and Filmzy.
Oh my gosh, what a convenient plug.
Yes, exactly.
Just in time for Halloween.
Yes. It's a great time to watch it at Halloween. Speaking of plugs, by the way, I almost forgot. I'm on Substack now after my Indiegogo for Escape from Planet Omega 12 didn't work out, and that's my fault, but I won't go into that now. But this is going to kind of tie into, and I still need to work on this. There are spelling errors to fix and all that sort of thing, but this is going to tie into everything I'm working on, not just Escape from Planet Omega 12. But anyway, go check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description. But let's get back to business. So each act is like an episode with a cliffhanger where all the ideas you have introduced at the beginning come to a head at the end of the act. Uh, I'll be using Aliens as an example, just in case you didn't read the headline. If you've never seen it, and then shut up, Winston. If you've never seen it, I've lost my place. Bad dog. Then this isn't going to be of any use to you, because I'm not going to take time to describe characters or plot details. I'm just going to point to them as examples. Go familiarize yourself with the first two movies. Pretend they stopped with the second one. Then come back here, and I will continue. Yes.
I like Alien 3. I have appreciation for Alien 3.
I have dedicated many videos to why I think that movie does not work. And I won't go into it here, but I even had Chuck Dixon on my show to debate him about it. So confident do I feel about my displeasure with that movie.
Okay. Does Chuck like it?
He does, I think. I think more of his thing was that I'll send you a link to the interview, because we had a lot of fun.
Sure.
But I think it was more of, he felt that Alien 3 was a more true sequel to the original Alien in spirit than Aliens was.
Yeah.
I
can see that.
I have a fundamental disagreement in the intent of what a sequel should be, I think, in that sense. Because if you just want a repeat of Alien, then you can go to Alien 3, but at the same time, there's so much that Alien 3 fails to do that the original movie did well. And so I think it's well, anyway, I wasn't going to get into that. I was not going to.
My fault. I apologize.
You're dragging me into the Alien 3 rant. I'm trying to be positive here. Anyway, so in Act 1, we are reintroduced to Ripley and what her life and attitude are like after the first movie. We see how people interact with her when she tries to tell them her experience, how her trauma. I'm shutting the door. I can't do this, Winston. Winston, knock it off.
The show can only make use of one co-host.
Wagging his tail at me like he's happy I'm yelling at him. Okay, so anyway, so we see how people interact with her when she tries to tell her experience, how her traumas made her feel scared and alone. And then we see how she is treated when people who have a stake in the situation start to believe that she may be telling the truth. By the way, if I can ever get Gary to give me my own morning coffee intro on Pop Culture Minefield, I'm including the thanks for the coffee part in Aliens. She and a platoon of space marines who think they've got everything under control go to the planet to check things out. Then they find Newt, who foreshadows how bad things can really get. But the Marines think, we've got this. Ripley, however, recognizes her own trauma in the child, as well as the ghost of the daughter, if you watch the director's cut, she lost in the 57 years she was asleep. Soon, they're in a hive, and most of their party gets wiped out. Ripley saves what is left of them in a huge climactic rescue, and boom, the first act is done. Both characters and the audience understand the full scope of the situation. Got anything to add so far?
Nope, I'm just listening along.
Okay, so, but yeah, that's essentially, what a good first act of the movie in my mind does. It, you get the first 15 pages in general, where you kind of have, you're learning. In a sequel, you're getting caught up with where the character is at. But it's the same as in an original movie. In around the first 15 minutes, you're getting to know the character, their daily life, and you're not necessarily just watching them go through everything, but you're getting a sense of who they are, what they're about, and what they value. And a little bit, it's still warming up to what's going to happen. But around 15 pages, you get that inciting incident. And and then you know that the character's gotta, okay, this is where the, it's almost like warming up to the starting line. The 15-minute mark is when they actually start to run.
Hmm.
And then by the end of the first act, everything is kind of like the full scope of what happened in the inciting incident and what that means for the character and what they have to do. And then kind of, it's almost like running up against a wall in the end of the first act,
Yeah.
where
Well,
they've
one of
got.
the, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the strengths of Aliens, and it was used as, I mean, there, setting aside the fact that nearly beat for beat, story wise, Aliens and Alien are clones of one another in a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
ways. One of the best devices used in both films to really establish characters without having to spend a whole lot of time or dumping a lot of exposition are the meal scenes at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
where you see them interact with each other. You get an idea of each person's personality. It's easier, I think, to identify people in Aliens because they're all referring to each other by their last names. You don't have to get a lot of complicated names or anything. You just got Hicks and you've got Bishop, and everybody's just a one name kind of deal, and they have assigned that identity plus their personality, and you see the camaraderie as well, and you see
Yeah.
how these people work together. Either as in the first film they were kind of like space trucking family. In the second film they are military dysfunctional siblings, and it spends just enough time at the beginning so that you know who everybody is. You have an idea of their personality, their interrelationships, like between Vasquez and uh, God, what's the guy, the big blonde guy's
Drake
name? Is it? Yeah,
or
right. Yeah,
Drake or
the Drake. Yes, Drake.
yeah.
Yeah, her and Drake. Um, and that's important because in a lot of movies, I think of just as an example, in contrast of a, even though they were made in different time periods and technically one's a prequel, I think of John Carpenter's The Thing, or the original The Thing. You get all these scenes where you see these guys interact with each other. You get an idea of who they are, you get their names, you get the idea of their dynamics one to another. And even though you have shots that are just filled with characters and there's so many people to keep an eye on, they're able to establish these characters in such a distinct way you don't feel like it's too crowded, as compared to The Thing, the prequel, which, and it's a whole other subject, but just as a contrast, you have tons of characters filling the screen, but by the end of the movie, I don't know who they are. I don't remember anything about them. They didn't establish anything about their personalities. I couldn't pick one out of a crowd to say what kind of person are they, or what is their general attitude. Yeah, the dinner scene, it reminds me a lot of what Robert Altman did in MASH, where you had the overlapping dialogue where they're sitting down talking with each other, and you just get this sort of very human scene of understanding where everybody sits on the totem pole, how they interact, and you're not dumping ham-handed exposition about everybody's position in the movie or their hierarchy. You're getting it organically, and really establishing those guys and caring about them, knowing that they have. If you see characters care about each other, the audience will empathize. If you don't have characters that care about each other, good, bad, or otherwise, the audience has nowhere to go. And this movie does a great job with that.
Yeah, well, I think you make some really good points there, and I'll segue for a moment from what we're reading here to address some of what you said, because I think you touched on some good stuff, and it's got things going in my brain. So let's talk about The Thing for just a moment. The great, and also actually we can equate this to Alien and Aliens as well, but what you're talking about is good show don't tell character development.
Yes.
And I actually think, I don't remember if I addressed some of it in this, because it's actually been I'm kind of going into this blind. I haven't read my own thing in a while, so I don't remember what I said. But what your point about The Thing is a fantastic one, because you just get to spend time with them. You get to see them, they're bickering, even though it's not, it's sometimes irritated with each other and that sort of thing, but you get the sense that they all like each other and that you could hang out with them. And through their interactions, you learn about, what kind of personalities they actually are through their interactions. Same with aliens. Now, this is the problem with the Thing prequel, is that instead of doing that, which of course it would be a little redundant to have the same kind of environment with the same kind of people doing the same kind of job, doing the same kind of interaction. So I'm not saying that they weren't up against a big challenge, but in the prequel, they introduced you to a single character first, and then had her come in and kind of be introduced to everybody. And then it was like the writers didn't know what to do with the interactions from there, because she's a new person. So they gave this kind of ham-fisted conflict between her and the guy that hired her, that suddenly, even though he hired her for her expertise, suddenly for no explicable reason wants to not take her seriously at all and just override her and be a jerk to her. And then
manufactured conflict. Whereas in the first Thing movie, you're introduced to a situation. You're not introduced to a character. You're introduced to the dog shows up, and it's a mystery, and it's a situation, and these characters are already in place. They already know each other. The other thing that's intangible about the original Thing, or I should say John Carpenter's The Thing, is that the cast had 2 weeks of rehearsal before they started filming, which these days would be practically unheard of. You never hear about people like spending weeks of rehearsal prior to the production. They're usually just like they do a table read and they do some maybe rough stuff together, and then they're shooting, because the pace of filmmaking these days is so staccato and so conveyor belt that the amount of the kind of time it would take to actually establish these characters and them to get out their nuances as they relate to each other, like you see in the Thing, that's the product of really good acting and really good rehearsal. And I don't know how much rehearsal there was for Aliens, but you do get it. Like I said, you get this sense that they are a family. They're dysfunctional, but they're an understanding family of one another. And it really comes through very quickly and organically. And it's so good.
Well, with Aliens, they actually did some pseudo boot camp together on the grounds of
There you
Pinewood
go.
Studio. So
that works.
And the interesting thing about that is that the actor that was going to play Hicks, and I forget his name, but he got in trouble for drugs right when they were starting shooting, which in England at the time, it wasn't, like a little misdemeanor. It was like, you're going to jail and we're revoking your passport. And so they had to get Michael Biehn in like that weekend. And so that I think Gillian Hurd, the producer, just called him up and said, "Is your passport in order?" And he's like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Get over here." And he said that kind of helped in a way, because he's like, I took his uniform. I took his part in the film. I took his paycheck, he said, but he's like, I was kind of like the quiet odd man out Marine. And he's like, I think that kind of helped. He's like, he's like, I didn't want to go through the boot camp anyway. And Sigourney Weaver kind of made it a point to not take part in that stuff as well, because she wanted to seem like the odd person out. As Ripley.
She was a space trucker. She's not a soldier. She's just a cargo loader.
Exactly. But Carrie Henn as Newt, she said she would grab her Cabbage Patch doll and hold it like a gun and run with the Marines. So she had a really good time. That set, for all the trouble of that production, because James Cameron is such a taskmaster and he was pissing everybody off, the actors had a great camaraderie. Carrie Henn said that during, because child actors can only act a certain amount of hours a day, and they set up, she's like, I had an arts and crafts table, and she's like, Bill Paxton would come and sit with me and like cut out paper characters for me and glue stuff together. And, said he was kind of like a big brother on the set. Anyway, we should get back to this, because we're talking about writing. But one last little note about this, and this is one of the problems that I have with Alien 3, where you get character development through show don't tell. And I do believe I made a video about this on my YouTube channel. You get in Alien 3, and this drives me crazy, people go like, oh, the character development in Alien 3 is better, because you get the backstory of Clemens and how he was, a drug addict and how he killed a bunch of people in a medical accident. And, I was like, that's not actually character development. That's literally, we stopped the film to give some backstory about why he's there, which doesn't really matter, because just like in the Thing prequel, where the manufactured conflict doesn't actually come to anything, his story doesn't really come to anything either. And if I was rewriting Alien 3, which I've thought about, I would have that story actually matter to his character arc. But instead, they're like, oh, look, we killed him off, reverse expectations. It's kind of the beginning of that trend happened in the 90s. And my feelings about how the 90s influence where we are today is a whole other subject. But anyway, let's go back to this. So the second act opens with discussing just how bad the problem is, far worse than they imagined, and asking themselves, how are we going to handle this? That's how every second act starts. The characters are forced to rethink their situation in some way and come up with a new plan to deal with it. This act is all about forming a new approach to the problem, and it usually goes pretty well for a bit. Then, with new problems popping up along the way, until bam, everything starts turning to crap, unraveling until everything is left in ruins, leaving our characters in the darkest hour, quotes, darkest hour. Their ride back to the ship crashes. They need to call another ship down remotely because the planet is going to explode soon. The hardware to do that is trashed. Okay, Bishop will have to go out there and do it manually. Stay safe and bolted up in the compound. Wait a minute, Burke is trying to infect Ripley and Newt with a face hugger. Now aliens have found a way in. The ride is here, but now everyone is dead, and the aliens just grabbed Newt and took her back to their hive to make more baby aliens. End of the second act. Any comments on that?
That is it, as I remember it.
Okay. Act 3. Now everything is fallen apart and things are even worse. The planet is about to blow up. The one soldier who could help is out of commission, and Ripley has to go into the belly of the beast to get back the one thing she cares about. Again, Ripley has to rethink everything to get through this. Things get worse. The tracking device on Newt gets dropped. They run into a queen alien. Oh no, the queen got on the ship once they escaped and tore Bishop in half. Now, technically, that part's a fourth act, a surprise fourth act.
Right.
One of the things that I don't think I touched on here, and Gary mentioned on Pop Culture Minefield, we were talking about storytellings. He said, most character arcs most stories are stories of irony. And I don't know if that's true or not. But I definitely see what he's getting at with it. If you were to say the irony here of Aliens, which is Ripley's arc, her development as a character in the sequel, which you didn't quite get in the original Alien, it was well, I won't touch on the original Alien because she obviously did have an arc in that. It's just a different arc. But in this, when you meet Ripley, her attitude when they say we've got to go back is, there's no way I'm going back there. It's not worth it. I'll die. And you'll all die too. By the time we get to the beginning of the third act, her arc has changed, and now her focus is Newt, where she's being told by Bishop, the planet's going to blow up in 24 minutes, something like that. And her attitude is, I have to go out there. It's worth it. And I don't care if I die, or, it's worth taking the risk. So she's completely flipped on her attitude.
Except that that arc makes a lot more sense in the extended edition, where you get to see how she's sort of mourning over the loss of not being there for her daughter.
Yes.
And then that connection between she and Newt makes more sense. In the theatrical version, that point isn't really made that strongly. And so the whole mothering instinct and sort of Newt as a stand-in for the lost childhood of her daughter and everything else doesn't really connect that well. So the only way to watch Aliens now is through the extended edition, as far as I'm concerned. Even though the pre-footage part from Hadley's Hope of Newt and her family, I think, could still be cut. I don't think you'd lose anything.
Yeah, and just James Cameron said that his director's cut is the definitive version, and I agree. Yeah, the meeting Newt and her brother and the family could have been cut, and the film still works fine. It's just cool to see. It's just a cool scene.
Sure.
Same with the scenes with the robot. I think the robot sentry gun scene, by the way, and I hope anyone that listens knows what we're talking about. I think that adds to the tension of they know, because in the original cut it's like, oh, the aliens are finally here, and they cut the power. In the director's version, you get the tension of like, no, they're out there. We know they're out there just trying to find their way in. And they know we're in here. But going back to that, yeah, I think the movie still works, but it's stronger for knowing that her daughter grew old and died while she was away, while she was in hyperspace for 57 years. It's still understandable why she would go back for Newt. But yeah, I think that it does help the arc. Because she's doing it, her attitude changes because she's going back for the thing that she failed to do the first time in her mind. So anyway, let's move on. Let's see. Oh no, the Queen got on the ship. Once they escape and tore Bishop in half, Ripley has had enough. And here comes the big climactic showdown over the daughter that Ripley lost, but has a chance to redeem that loss. Oh, I wrote about that here. Ripley wins, end of Act 3, end of movie. Within these acts are highs and lows, like a roller coaster taking you up and down. Stay high or low for too long, and the story gets boring. But what is the story? All of the stuff I wrote about is just the stuff that happens. That's not the story. Okay, so this is the most important thing I'll tell you. Here it is. The story is how each character reacts to the stuff happening and how it changes them. We have the story of Ripley, who is broken, but has to pull herself together to overcome her trauma. She goes from telling people, oh, I wrote this down, this point I made. I don't want to go back out there. I'll die, to you can't stop me from going into the lair of the beast to rescue Newt, and I'm willing to die to do it. That's the most boiled down explanation of her arc as a character. Here's the story of Bishop, who is silently seeking Ripley's approval by overcoming the prejudice that her there's the story of overcoming the prejudice that her previous experience with an android has instilled in her. There's the story of Hudson, who is a punk ass and thinks he's invincible, but turns coward and freaks out when faced with something tougher than he is. In the end, though, he redeems himself when he saves Newt from the facehugger and then later goes down fighting, holding off the aliens as the rest of his fellows escape. Burke has a story. Hicks has a story. Every last one of them has a story, and each one is reacting to what is happening and also reacting to how they're interacting with each other as events unfold. Each one of these arcs has a beginning, a middle, and an end, no matter how things turn out for them. Each one either learns something and grows or meets their end because they refuse to. My favorite example is the line, "You always were an asshole, Gorman." It really sums up what Vasquez has been internally expressing all along. Watch how she interacts with him up until that moment. She doesn't respect him, not from the start, but when his decisions get her partner killed and make everything go from bad to worse, it confirms her attitude towards him, building wave after wave of resentment through the runtime of the movie. When she gets burned by acid and trapped by the aliens in the air ducts, Gorman redeems himself to her by going back to save her and making the choice to sacrifice himself and die with her when he realizes that they're both doomed. Rather than leave her to face her fate alone, he makes the decision that she would have made for any of her fellow soldiers. In that last moment, she sees his bravery, sees that he is actually a true comrade in arms, and he is repentant for his failures in her eyes. I don't know if she forgives him, but she does respect him. This is shown brilliantly not by cheap dialogue, but by her clasping her hand over his as he uncorks the grenade that will spare them a much more horrible death to come. So, anyway, that I don't know if you got anything to add to that, but that's one of the
yeah. Oh, just more showing, not telling, showing through character action, and you don't have to spend a whole lot of time turning that scene into a Hallmark card, because you've spent the time over the course of the film establishing both of those characters and their attitudes so well that by the time you get to that point, no explanation is needed. You know where Vasquez is coming from. You know what kind of guy Gorman has been up to this point, and to see that contrast between them and her to make that one sort of like, grudging respect insult to the guy in that moment, and then her hand going over his, you don't need to say anything else. You know exactly what's happened there. But see, that's one of the things that a lot of movies don't do these days, is that moment, that scene, that interaction was earned through previous establishment of character and events and evolution. A lot of movies and TV shows I see these days, they give you that big dramatic moment, but it comes out of nowhere. It's just there for, I don't know, trailer fodder, or because the writers were just so happy with themselves or something that they thought of a really dramatic moment, but they didn't do anything to actually earn it and make it make sense to previous events. That's the real trick that works for this movie, and you don't see that very often in other movies now.
Yeah, well, and I think this is why we have so much bad writing from the new crop, the new generation, because they remember the cool scenes, but they don't understand, like you said, how they were earned. Mm-hmm. They just they just literally see, it's like the cliche of the soldier going, "Go on without me." It's like, I'll stay behind him and hold him off,
but it's Tropic Thunder. It's just Tropic Thunder type writing, except at least they were aware, and there was the whole point of it was to make it as cheesy and cliche as possible. Whereas, the two competing individuals at the last second having to get along in the trenches or whatever, that's cliche in and of itself. But if you earn that, if you establish those characters, if you establish a adversarial relationship that comes to a head at the very last moment of decision and where it matters, then it means something. It's about, you have to manufacture meaning, but it takes effort, and it takes, it's a sort of like an emotional Chekhov's gun. You have to establish that at the beginning so that it has a payoff at the end. Otherwise, it's just nowhere, and it's weightless, and the audience just rolls their eyes and moves on.
Well, a Chekhov's gun is essentially, again, it's a more simplistic arc. If you show a gun in the first act, you have to use it at least by the end of the second or the beginning of the third. But it's, again, it's an arc. It's going, this is important, and with, again, going back to the Thing prequel, the idea of the manufactured conflict between the guy that hired the woman, and they're so memorable, I don't remember their names. It never really pays off in any way. It doesn't come to anything. Same with, again, in Alien 3, Clemens' story is literally, he shows his hand. He shows what he's got, the movie literally stops to say this story is important, only for it in the very next moment to be proven not important at all. Right. So anyway, going on. So there's really a lot going on in this movie. When I hear people say that the Marines and aliens are one-dimensional, it really tells me that a lot of people don't know what actual character development is. Within minutes of meeting each of them, we learn so much about them that they feel instantly familiar, as if we've known them a lifetime. That's why they endure, where the characters in later sequels feel so ham-fisted and forgettable. Sorry if you disagree and like those characters, but objectively, it's true, they're inferior. Wow, it's like our conversation is predicting what I'm going to write next. Honestly, I should know what I wrote, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Is that everything you need to know? Is this the only way to tell a story? Hardly. Becoming a good writer takes decades of practice and intense attention to both the big picture and the minute details. Did I spell minute of your story? You also need to have stories you really want to tell. Like I said before, these are just some of the foundational things you can start with as you build your own film script, comic book, novel, or play. Happy writing. And oh yeah, I'm plugging if you like more about if you like to know more about my feelings regarding the Alien franchise, you can watch a series of YouTube videos I've done on the subject by clicking here. What happens when you click here? Oh, there it is. It's a whole bunch of
Wait, you have a lot of thoughts on the Alien franchise.
yeah. Well, some of it,
Actually,
like here's my tutorial on how to build a chest burster.
Oh yeah.
And here's Alien 3 Face Off, Chuck Dixon versus Christopher Moonlight. You can't really see the thumbnail too well, but it's I put Chuck's head on Bane and my head on the bat, you know.
Oh yeah. You know my favorite line from Alien 3 is? Favorite line ever. It's when the guy's cleaning the tubes or whatever, and the dog shows up with his face all messed up from the face hugger having gotten on him. And he takes the dog in his hands. He looks at him. He's very concerned. He says, "Who would do this to a dog?" And the idea that you have a planet that's filled with nothing but murderers and criminals and insane people, and yet even this guy would say, "Who would do this to a dog?" And it's both hilarious and touching at the same time that even here nobody would mess with a dog.
Yeah,
you know, it's just like man's best friend. It's like who, but it's just yeah. Of all the crazy people and murderers on this planet, well, no one would do this to a dog. It's just such a bizarre little comment, but it always makes me laugh.
It's there's a lot of the thing that drives me the most crazy about Alien 3 is there are a lot of good ideas in it, but it's like in my mind it's like pick one and go with that rather than trying to. It's very schizophrenic in its writing. And again, one of my complaints about everyone's head is shaved. You can barely tell who anyone is anyone is. People die, and then I'm like, oh, that guy died, and then he's in the next scene, and I'm like, and sometimes I feel like the filmmakers didn't even know, but did we kill them off or not? And I don't honestly, I don't think the assembly cut helps it. I actually think the assembly cut is more schizophrenic and even more boring. But again, as you can see, I'm pretty harsh on it. Now, here's a full disclaimer here. Anybody watching this after the fact, because I don't think anyone's watching right now, but I did not make these videos because I was an outraged fanboy. I'm perfectly fine with just I think everybody has the choice of saying to themselves, okay, this story is canon in my mind, and I'm not even going to pay attention to the rest. I only really love Alien and Aliens. The other movies I've actually, I really wanted to like, but I just don't even pay attention to them. Some of these, by the way, in the video, interview with Odd Studios when they did Alien Covenant, they did the practical effects for that. Here's my interview with Alec Gillis, who worked on he worked on Aliens, and then after he left Stan Winston Studios and formed Studio ADI, which I got to work for him when he had that company. He went on to do Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, both Aliens versus Predator movies, and Prey. Here's how to build a miniature egg. So I'm having fun, These are more of critiques of, where I think the movie went wrong. I even think I did a video on what I would have done differently. Tell me if you think this is an insane idea, and I don't know if I will ever actually have the time to do it. But one of the things I thought about doing is just writing my own script for Alien 3 and just putting it on the internet to see if it gets a reaction. My
there was
rule.
okay.
What?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say my rule would be this. I would write it as if I had been hired to write it at the time of the original production, with the actors available, and that the sets that were built because they were writing that movie after the sets were built. I mean, they were handing David Fincher pages as he was shooting. So, the rules would be, yes, the sets are built, the cast is there, Sigourney Weaver is there. So what would you do with all of that? Not just do a complete rewrite, because there was the William Gibson version that they did. I think they did a comic adaptation and a radio play adaptation where they brought back Michael Biehn. Did you see any of that?
No, I didn't.
Okay. I read
There
this.
was, and I know in one of the video games they supposedly canonically let Hicks live or
Yeah,
something,
it was
which
something.
was silly.
Yeah, like a Marine said to him, "I thought you were dead," and he said, like, "Yeah, long story," and then they left it at that. It's like, no, in Alien 3, they literally showed you your mangled body.
Yeah.
So but the Alien 3 script that William Gibson did was not much better, unfortunately. It started out interesting and then it got very silly. And it almost turned it like the end. I'm just gonna. Do you mind if I spoil it? Can I go ahead and spoil it?
Okay.
It's the end is literally two different aliens that have been genetically engineered in different ways, fighting to the death while everyone escapes the space station.
Godzilla versus King Kong. Yeah.
It was exactly like that. It was so outside of the realm of Alien, but I think I wouldn't mind having a crack at rewriting that script, because I think you can have everything you had in Alien 3. You could have Ripley be alone again with no weapons. You could have the prisoners. You could have all of that stuff, but you could have better established characters with stronger arcs, and you didn't have to kill Newt and Hicks to do it. A matter of fact, what I would have done, and I think I said this in my video, or maybe I've came up with this after the fact, but I would have had it so the escape pod that was ejected was just Ripley's, and maybe Bishop's as well. But that Ripley, what she was fighting for in Alien 3 is mainly the knowledge that Hicks and Newt are safe and headed back to Earth. Like maybe Hicks would wake up and you would have maybe radio exchanges or whatever form of communication they have there. Where she's saying to him, make sure you take care of her.
Yeah.
And now, honestly, I would have led it straight into Alien 4 as well, because I would have had a scene where, granted, I came up with this after I saw Prometheus, but I would have had it so there was a Clemens actually, this is what I would have done. I would have had two factions in the prison. I would have had the faction that is on her side, Clemens, the warden, maybe a few of the other prisoners, like Charles Dutton's character, Dylan. And then the other faction of prisoners, where essentially somehow word gets to them from the company. She's impregnated with an alien. We want that specimen. It's in your best interest that, she's taken care of. But Clemens essentially says to her, I can operate and get that out of you. I would also have multiple aliens. I'd have like 2 or 3 or something like that, where essentially they're aliens trying to get at her to protect her because it's a queen. And so they would be held up, like sealed into the surgical center, but there would also be other prisoners trying to stop them. But essentially what would happen is this chestburster, this queen would be, I don't know, contained or something like that, but they'd still have to deal with the other aliens. Maybe they're trying to kill it. Maybe the prisoners have it contained, something like that. I don't know. I'd have to work on it, brainstorm it. But, the idea essentially is that by the time the movie's over, the company would have obtained the specimen, taken Ripley with them, gone onto onto a space station or a lab facility that then would have turned into Alien Resurrection, except it wouldn't be called Alien Resurrection. I'm essentially now plotting the Alien series from here. But
well, yeah, all you have to do is just write it, then change all the character names and things, and sell it as a brand new script. You'll be set.
Yeah, well, this is how I ended up writing the Quantum Terror, because originally the Quantum Terror was meant to be an Alien fan film, and I very quickly went into, now the script, that the movie that you saw was not going to be what it was like. I'm just saying, like, I had the idea of like underground tunnels with aliens in it, and it'd be in space, not on Earth. But my brain quickly started going like, well, if I'm going to do all this cool stuff and put this much effort into it, I want it to be something that I own, not a fan film where I'm not able to monetize it.
Right.
But anyway, I think kind of you make a point there. You get a good idea for, a franchise film, and then you realize that you're never going to be able to make that film. And then you go and, I mean, I definitely have my Roger Corman-esque Alien knockoff ideas that I would love to do on a budget. And
well, I mean, there's obviously a potential success in that, because every time I think about somebody who's like, yeah, I really like this franchise, I really like this IP or something, but it's not mine. I can't do anything with it, so I'll write something that's a riff off of it, but then I'll just sort of like change some names and stuff. And I immediately think back to 50 Shades of Grey, because it was a Twilight fanfic, and she just changed stuff and then took it off in its own direction and became a zillionaire. And it's just like, it can happen, but you just have to. I remember in one of my writing classes in college, after writing, we had a story assignment, and I wrote this story about a bank robbery, and I used this one line where I said something to the effect of, the guy's hand was full of gun. And my writing teacher thought, that's a really great line, of full of gun. I like that. I said, yeah, I took that from a James Bond novel. And she's like, oh, don't tell me that you stole it. Like, well, I mean, it's just one. I mean, the story isn't a James Bond. It's not that one phrase, a handful of gun. He's like, oh, okay, well, that's a good steal. So if you can borrow and turn it into something different enough that it's not like plagiarism or whatever, hey, go for it.
Well, Ray Bradbury was a big fan of prompts.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that was how he wrote, like with the story The Veldt, which in my mind is the precursor to the Star Trek holodeck. I don't know if you've read that story.
I've read the story also. Did you ever see the video of what was his name? It was a Danger Mouse or whatever that did the song The Veldt. You ever hear that song?
No.
Oh, this is a great story. So I'll find the video for you because it's hilarious. He writes a piece of music, and he calls it The Veldt, and he puts it up on like SoundCloud, and he says, anybody who wants to try me out by recording some lyrics to this, go ahead. And the moment that some guy just sends him an audio file, and he plays it, and he's on a live stream, and he hears it for the first time, and the guy who did the lyrics, he wrote all the lyrics himself. He made them go completely off the story, without the only prompt being this is the title. He recognized the title as the Ray Bradbury story, and he wrote these lyrics that follow along with the story. And you see the musician, his mind explodes as it's not only does the singing work, the lyrics work exactly as he thought, and it's like this creative supernova all at once. It's great. I'll send you the video. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Now I got to wrap this up soon, but
yep.
It's because I just realized I haven't had any lunch, and I got to get my kids from school soon. But with Ray Bradbury, with The Veldt, the story behind that was essentially, I think he just thought about a nursery, and he's like, well, what about a nursery? And for anyone that doesn't know this story, by the way, it's about a holographic nursery that these spoiled brat kids spend all their time in, and the parents are at their wits' end because their kids don't respect them. So every time they go in there, it's like walking into the African veldt, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the heat, and then, stuff ensues from there. I won't spoil it because it's a great short story, and most of Ray Bradbury's short stories are fantastic and imaginative that way. But yeah, it definitely comes down to, you know, he didn't know where it was going, and then he said, you know, his classic phrase, I throw up in the morning and then I clean it up in the afternoon, you know, is saying, you know,
there you go.
These prompts are great. But yeah, working from a franchise premise to start, I think there's absolutely no shame in that, and I encourage it because honestly, like you said, you never know where it's gonna go. You know, if you're willing to kind of follow the ideas as the logic unfolds, and then you figure out, you know, how to give it the arcs and all that sort of thing. But anyway, I hope my Substack article tracks, seem to track for you, which is gratifying to me, and I hope anyone watching found it useful. And I think unless you've got anything else to add, Scribe, we'll end the broadcast from here.
Nope, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, thanks for being on. And thanks for anyone who is, it looks like we got a couple of people watching. So if you have been watching and enjoyed this, thanks for being there. And if you're watching it after the fact, leave a comment and be sure to like and subscribe. And check out the links I put in the description to my Subscribe Star and Substack. All right, out.